Welcome to our look back at some great recent NBR video interviews in NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan. Coming up, a serial entrepreneur, trade, our book review, and more. We start with one of our Entrepreneur Series features. Raymond Dobb is a serial entrepreneur who, after starting his first business at 22, went on to build the successful removals company World Moving and Storage. He sold that in October last year and is now putting all his entrepreneurial nous into an entirely different venture, Provaco. Raymond Dobb joined the NBR's Maria Slade.
You've got to have a passion. You've got to have real passion and commitment to what you're doing. You've got to want to do it. And then once you lose your passion or you lose your direction within a business, it's really hard to be motivated in there and leading from the front. Or in our case, I was leading from the bottom. But you have to exude everything that you're talking about. You know, our values, we didn't just have them on the wall. We talked about those. We used those words every day. They weren't something up there. They were used. And if I went through some personal dramas and I just lost that purpose. Purpose is huge. And once I thought I'd settled, I went through a marriage issue which messed me around a lot, much more than I thought. And once I got that out of the way, I thought, I'll be right back at work. But I couldn't. I lost my purpose there. And that whole industry, that sector of the transport industry, I was just really disappointed at the greater industry that it wasn't really looking after those people who were really, really vulnerable. They were people like me who hadn't often had a good education and things like that, but didn't have the right mentoring to get them through. And what we really tried to do is just to make sure that those people were safe. You know, they felt safe. They came to work, felt safe. They wanted to come to work. We were a safe place, and we cared and loved them. And it's the same as I exited that business. My business partner, I had a smaller shareholding business partner. The best thing that I ever did was take him on. I love him to bits, and all of the staff there. So I've financed them into it, and they've actually, in the last year since I've sold, had their best year ever, which is just so rewarding.
And now you're onto something completely different, which is anaerobic digestion,
Yeah.
and you're trying to do good for the world in a completely different way.
Yeah.
So just give us the elevator pitch. What is Provaco?
Provaco is anaerobic digestion. Anaerobic means no oxygen, and this is around the world everywhere. There's thousands of on-farm anaerobic digesters throughout Europe. England, actually, the government over there assists farmers to get into it. They think it's such a good thing. Germany, Denmark, Holland, Austria, all of them have it. Through the Americas, it's everywhere, but it hasn't been prominent here. And I think it's a massive shame because it's a hero product. So essentially what it does is you collect effluent from the farm and you can actually add food wastes and things like that into it as a super fuel. And it goes into a big tank for 21 to 25 days. In that tank, the tank is heated to body fuel. The tank is just like a big stomach, actually, and it transforms the effluent. It transforms the structure of the effluent into what we call digestate. And digestate is a really potent form of bio fertilizer. It's amazing. It's our hero product, and it's just phenomenal that it hasn't been utilized more before. It has through that structure change, all of the nutrients that are in there are mineralized into something that the soils and plants love and will accept into them more than twice the amount of other growth promotants. It's just phenomenal. So we're looking here to reduce leaching with that product.
And so just finally, Raymond, this is a huge challenge for you, isn't it? Because it's a whole new technology that you don't know anything about. How are you dealing with that?
Well, it's really, really scary because everything else I've done has been a physical thing. If I work harder, I'll get the results. You know, if you provide a good, honest product and you work hard doing it, I'll get it. But this is something I really knew nothing about 6 months ago. A friend of mine, Jason, had been banging on about this for a few years, and we all thought he was a bit mad. But once I actually sat down and looked at it, it was amazing. And so the challenges for me are trusting everything that I've learnt so far to learn this product, trusting other people's technology, trusting that I can make this work with everything I've gained so far, which is bloody scary, but also really exciting. And I really want to see if I've got it really, if I've got the ability to do something that just isn't physical. And but the technology's there. We've partnered with a company out of America with who have been doing it for 46 years. They use American and European technology. So we've got all of their IP, we've got all their technology and hardware. So when we turn the key, it's going to work. All I've got to do is stitch it all together and make people trust us, really.
Provaco founder, serial entrepreneur Raymond Dobb, speaking with Maria Slade there. Now trade, and our political editor Brent Edwards' interview with trade lobbyist Stephen Jacoby, who wasn't getting too excited about the prospect of a free trade deal with the United Kingdom.
New Zealand normally hasn't been in the business of setting deadlines because with trade negotiations, every deadline you set seems never to be met. So clearly something is up. But of course, even come August, if the deal is not a good deal, I don't think for a moment that the New Zealand government should agree to it.
Well, look, Australia and the UK have reached agreement in principle. Is that the template for the sort of deal that would be acceptable to you, or is that not good enough?
Well, I think we need to be clear about what has actually been agreed in principle, and I think that the Australia and the UK are to be congratulated on the stage they've reached. No problem with that. But this is not a done deal. I mean, obviously those elements are going to feature in whatever final agreement is worked out. But it's been made very clear in subsequent, press statements and what have you, that this is simply a milestone and there is still negotiating to do. So we need to wait until we see the final deal. But look, I think that when it comes to those key agricultural products, I think that the time frame set for elimination of tariffs, 5 years for dairy, 10 years for beef and sheep meat, they are at the ambitious end, I think, of what we thought might be possible. I think that for New Zealand, we've got our own specific characteristics to bring to bear. We're a much larger exporter of dairy products than Australia is, for example. And there are all sorts of disruptive effects on the market that increased Australian sendings of sheep meat, for example, are going to have for us. So all of these things will need to be taken into account, and I'm sure that's what's happening right now.
Will it be more problematic then for New Zealand to get some sort of deal on agricultural access, more problematic than it has been for Australia?
Well, I think both Australia and New Zealand presented some sorts of problems in the views of, in the minds of English, or British, I should say, agricultural producers. But bear in mind that the EU has been trading into Britain for the last 50 years without tariffs and non-tariff barriers. So the additional access that's being made available needs to be seen, in that context. I think the fact that the Australians have got a good outcome for them is quite positive for us. The other way around, if they'd have done a poor deal, wouldn't have been so good. So I think we just need to continue the processes that we have underway, and hopefully we can do better in some areas than Australia has done. I've no doubt that in some areas they will do better than us. That is the nature of trade negotiations. Of course, what we want to see from global Britain is the elimination of tariffs. If they're not prepared to do that, they're not really walking the talk about wanting to be the new player on the block committed to the principles of freer trade.
And what will an agreement in principle mean rather than an agreement? I mean, I think you've referred to the Australian one where there's still more negotiation to go on. So should we take much notice of an agreement in principle?
I think we should take notice of it, and of course they've been quite specific about those parts of the agreement that they are prepared to make public. But Brent, you'll remember that in TPP we had the broad outlines of an agreement reached, and it took about 5 or 6 years after that to get the final agreement. I don't think for a moment it's going to take that long with the UK, but I think we just need to be quite clear what has happened. They have reached agreement on some areas. There is still work to do.
Trade lobbyist Stephen Jacoby with NBR political editor Brent Edwards. You're watching NBR Interviews featuring great NBR video interviews. I'm Paul Brennan. Now kiwi fruit, and in what some senior growers were calling an industry-defining moment, New Zealand kiwi fruit producers and growers had their last chance to vote on a one-year commercial trial by Zespri, a trial run at buying and branding illegally grown sun gold kiwi fruit in China. The vote took place at the end of June, with support for the resolution falling below the 75% threshold required to pass. A second resolution regarding the use of the Zespri brand label as part of the sales trial in order to understand consumer response only received 64.5%. In the run-up to the vote, the NBR's Nicola Shepherd spoke to University of Queensland China agribusiness expert Dr. Scott Waldron.
Now, we did ask Zespri to put someone up to have a discussion with you on camera, but Zespri declined. So I'm going to try to put to you Zespri's case. They first got wind of the illegal plantings of sun gold in China around about April 2016. Zespri estimates that now there are about 5,400 hectares of unauthorised sun gold plantings in China, and that Chinese growers produced 10 million trays of the kiwi fruit last season. Now, those growers in China haven't paid a cent for a licence to grow the fruit, unlike New Zealand growers, who this year are paying Zespri about $550,000 per hectare. Now, the fruit they're growing in China is of highly variable quality, and some of it is being passed off as Zespri fruit with fake labels. And since 2016, Zespri has tried other avenues to stop the spread of illegal plantings, including successfully prosecuting a Chinese grower for taking G3 and another variety to China. But the company says, and I quote, "These actions alone will be ineffective in protecting the value we have created." They want to run this 1-year trial in which they buy some fruit, do lots of tests monitoring on it, and then put a Zespri Chinese origin sticker on the fruit that meets Zespri standards, and then sell it into a single supermarket to test consumer reaction. So what risks do you see in doing a trial like that?
The risks for the immediate trial are manageable because it's on a small scale. So I think they're talking about 50 hectares and 20 households, which is manageable. The risks are that China already has the genetics of the New Zealand sun gold variety, and by doing the trial, that there'd be also the transfer of other important property of New Zealand kiwi industry, which is in cold chain management, quality assurance, and management. And it's because of COVID, the restrictions of COVID, it's not possible for New Zealand-based Zespri staff to go to New Zealand. So that work will be done by partners in China who will be conducting all that and involved in the responsibility of transfer of the genetics and the knowledge.
Now, the CEO, Dan Masterson, has said, "We believe working with the Chinese industry could help us build partners and allies that would give us the best chance of asserting a degree of influence on the supply of G3 plantings and reduce the impact on our industry." Now, will they be able to assert a degree of influence if they do this trial? What's the experience of other companies who have tried to run JVs with China? How much leverage can you get from giving back to local Chinese economies like they would be doing in a trial like this?
Yeah, well, as I said, I think the risks in a small trial are manageable. But if that's successful, the next question is what that looks like at a full commercial scale-out level. And based on the memorandum of understanding that Zespri signed with the partner in November 2020, that's 50,000 tonnes, which, at average sort of yields and 1 hectare per household in Sichuan, it's about 3,000 households that Zespri will have to link with for a commercial operation. At that scale, it's virtually impossible, especially in some remote rural parts of Sichuan, to be able to manage the quality assurance. So that's the pesticides, the fungicides, and fertilizers at that level. And if that's not managed, then that has potential to damage Zespri's brand. That's one thing. And it's almost impossible to manage leakage of genetic material for a household to just pass on next to another household, or for local officials to be able to manage that process. So in that case, there are very limited ways for Zespri to be able to control the increased plantings of illegal plantings of sun gold.
University of Queensland China agribusiness expert Dr. Scott Waldron there speaking to the NBR's Nicholas Shepherd. You're watching NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan. Litigation funder LPF Group is backing a class action being brought by Dilworth School sexual abuse survivors. Survivor Neil Harding and another claimant known as HS have filed a complaint with the Human Rights Commission against the Auckland school for failing to protect students from systemic sexual abuse between 1970 and 2006. The action is on behalf of all victims, Harding said. Joining the NBR's Maria Slade was LPF Group Director Phil Newland.
This is a case that's been brought on behalf of the men who were boys who were sexually abused during their time at Dilworth School over a long period of time.
All right, so this is not your usual territory. Why is LPF getting involved?
Well, I guess like a lot of people, we were appalled by the reports that have been coming out. What LPF stands for is fighting on behalf of the underdog, on behalf of victims that can't otherwise afford to bring cases themselves. And when we saw this, we frankly couldn't just stand by and let it go unaddressed. Is
there any kind of personal connection with your team?
No, not really. Like anyone, as I said, who's seen this, we were appalled. How it actually came about was I was watching a news item about one of the prosecutions in relation to the case. My kids were with me on the sofa, and frankly, I was brought to tears about what had gone on, and the rest followed.
So not your usual territory. Have you done anything similar?
Well, we have done pro bono cases in the past where we've seen cases that wouldn't naturally attract litigation funding on its usual commercial terms, but haven't wanted to let something go unattended. So we've helped cases before to outcomes. Many of those have been dealt with privately and haven't attracted publicity. This one, of course, naturally will.
It's a class action complaint that you're taking to the Human Rights Commission, so you're not in the commercial courts like you normally would be. Just explain the mechanics of this.
Well, the mechanics for a complaint under the Human Rights Act is that you go first to the Human Rights Tribunal. There's an opportunity to go from there to the High Court if appropriate.
Right, so you've got quite a legal team behind you, Rachel Reid QC and Ali Van Ammers, and they're working pro bono, is that right?
Well, not just them, also Wilson Hale, the instructing lawyers, other people in the team like the communication specialist, Joyce Howes. When we started this, we didn't know what to expect in terms of how other people might contribute to the effort. To say we've been unbelievably moved by the contribution that people have been prepared to make. We've managed to assemble absolutely top-notch legal team to do this. They volunteered to do it on a pro bono basis, which of course is incredibly generous of them, and the case is in very good hands.
So it doesn't sound like it was a matter of twisting any arms to get people involved then?
No.
How much do you estimate this will all cost?
Well, it's extraordinary circumstances. It's unprecedented in terms of a complaint of this nature. Obviously, we'll be seeking meaningful and substantial compensation from Dilworth, and at the end of the day, what that will be a matter for the tribunal, for the courts, or for negotiation with Dilworth.
What does LPF get out of this?
Well, hopefully satisfaction, because we want to help people. In terms of financially, we get absolutely nothing out of this, nor would we want to get anything out of this. We're doing this because we want to, because we think it's the right thing to do. It's not a case that, in terms of usual litigation funding criteria, would easily attract litigation funding, because there's not a measurable pot of money, as it were, to chase on behalf of victims. And in light of the extraordinary circumstances where the harm done is anything but just financial harm, we didn't either want to or seek to profit from this case.
Well, normally you'd charge a fee, of course. What would you normally charge?
It ranges depending on the case, the size of the case, the risk of the case, what's involved in the case. Litigation funding fees range all over the place, frankly, depending on the case, from average territory is probably 15 through to 30% of the take. The take being what compensation might ultimately be awarded or settled for in the case. So if a plaintiff gets nothing, the litigation funder usually gets nothing.
But you'll recover your costs, though. You'd be aiming to do that, I imagine.
We'd be looking to the school for cost recovery, of course, out of pockets on the event, but that's by the by in the scheme of things.
LPF Group Director Phil Newland there, speaking to the NBR's Maria Slade. This is NBR Interviews NBR readers have been watching at nbr.co.nz. Now the book review by former NBR editor Neville Gibson. The book is Watergate Revisited, The Tragedy of King Richard by Michael Dobbs. Neville joined me in the NBR studio.
Oh, this story keeps giving, and of course over that period from 1973 when the Watergate investigation really reached its peak through to the present day, you've had a lot of releases from the archives, the 3,800 hours of Nixon conversations, which he recorded. Virtually every conversation he had in public office are on these tapes. These became available, and of course the historians have started picking over. And even though it's nearly 50 years since he resigned, there's still plenty that can be told, and this book's a pretty exciting, structured book.
And how does he couch the story? Is it like the clock ticking kind of story?
Maurice Dobbs, who's mainly a reporter and bureau chief and working for the Washington Post, and he was based in Europe during most of the Cold War. He did a similar book on the Cuban Missile Crisis hour by hour. This one covers nearly 6 months, starting with the inauguration of Nixon when he was elected the second time into his second term. That's January 20, when the Watergate thing was under investigation for the break-in, but hadn't really broken in a big way, right through for 6 months until August, when finally that sort of resolved itself there. But he didn't resign until a year later than that. But according to Dobbs, this is a pivotal period of the Watergate investigation, and he does it sort of day by day. And the main thing is that it led to a huge number of changes in presidential power in America. Of course, the presidents since then, including Trump, have tried to push back on that, but it really changed the course of American politics. It also broke up the political support for both the Democrats and the Republicans, getting to what you might call almost a dysfunctional system at the moment.
It is a tragic story, isn't it? It's like an epic own goal.
It is, because even the name Richard conjures up Richard the Crusader, the Lionheart. That was his mother named him after that. She named a couple of his brothers after other kings of England as well. And then, of course, there's the Shakespearean tragedy, Richard III, and Dobbs really structures it around a tragedy with the sort of beginning, the sort of peak of it, and then the catharsis at the end. And so it's written like a Shakespearean tragedy.
Do you get a sense of there could have been an alternative way of handling the situation he found himself in? I mean, just rolling all those tapes tells you something about the man, doesn't it?
He wanted the tape system, and basically it worked whenever he spoke. They didn't turn it on and off, that sort of thing. He wanted to record his presidency and his historic. That was his main thing, was his legacy, and he saw himself as part of history. His main reading was biographies of Napoleon, Disraeli, Churchill, these sort of people. That's what he spent his time studying.
And he saw himself in that sort of group.
He did, and he wanted to ensure that historians could accurately reflect what his decisions were, how they were reached, because he didn't trust the press. In fact, he didn't trust anyone. And the whole point of the original break-in at the Watergate headquarters of the Democratic Party wasn't done or even known to him, so far as we know, but it was done by Republican Party operatives who were basically paranoid about what the Democrats were up to.
He was in quite a good position. The Vietnam War was close to being solved, is not the right word, but ended. And that would have been a popular decision for the American base out there. I mean, he was in a pretty good position. And like I say, it seems like then in the story, is it the story of an epic bungle?
Well, that is basically one thing led to another. And it was a very minor crime, let's face it, the break-in. And Kissinger was getting most of the credit for the Vietnam talks coming to a peaceful end and the withdrawal there. And, of course, Nixon wasn't that keen because Kissinger had quite a high public profile. And
so there was an ego battle going.
There was that going on, and he didn't face any really difficult other decisions on the home market. The economy wasn't going that well, but there were no other world crises about. But of course, it was not the original break-in that was being investigated by the FBI and others. It was the cover-up that followed that got him into trouble. So it was a kind of hubris of a small decision that was wrong, and then an attempt to sort of unwind it. But
I think
it just went too far.
I think was it John Deans is reading your notes, has said that it was like a cancer, it was like a malignancy that just kept growing, adding to itself to the point where it ended up with him making that epic resignation speech and that wave from the helicopter on the lawn of the White House saying goodbye.
Well, that's right. Well, Dean was the one who, along with a couple of others, who basically he was the one of the main people who never got jailed. He spent 6 months in a safe house giving evidence to the FBI and other prosecuting teams, and there's dozens of them. So Dean really spilled all the beans. He wrote a book immediately afterward, giving a bit of a lot of us read these books back in the mid-70s when they came out, and of course there was the film All the President's Men. But Dean, about 4 years ago, released a huge book, much bigger than this book, 600 pages, where he the title gives it away. It said, what did Nixon know and what didn't he know? And Dean basically says Nixon didn't know about the break-in at Watergate, but he made the fateful decision that there should be a cover-up.
Sounds like it's quite a ride of a
It's
read.
an exciting book, and it's well written. And Dobbs, he really knows what he's doing here. It's in the ticking clock formula really works. It's a page turner.
And Neville Gibson's full review of Michael Dobbs's Watergate Revisited, The Tragedy of King Richard, is at nbr.co.nz right now. And join me again soon as we showcase the best NBR video interviews in NBR Interviews. I'm Paul Brennan. Thanks for watching.